The mismanagement of taxpayer money in South Africa continues. Auditor General Kimi Makwetu has called on government leaders to act now to halt the trend of disappointing audit outcomes. Today, Makwetu released the national and provincial government audit outcomes for the latest financial year. Only 26% or 100 departments received clean audits, meaning they were able to actually account for expenditure in proper financial reports and comply with financial laws. The number has been dropping steadily for 5 years. Fruitless and wasteful expenditure continues to rise, and irregular expenditure, and that's important, that's where laws could be flouted, increased to 62 billion rand from 51 billion rand last year. Well, let's speak to the Auditor General, Kimi Makwetu, joining us from our studio in Cape Town now. Thank you, Auditor General. So you've painted this picture of things getting worse over a 5-year period, and you say that you're basically being blatantly ignored or your recommendations are being disregarded. Why would that be?
Well, if you look at people who look after other people's money, if they are allowed to do things in ways other than the law prescribes, and there is no consequence for doing that, the tendency is that they carry on year in and year out, regardless of the recommendations that are made by a statutory audit office. I think that is what is at the heart of it. Many make promises to fix the control environments, but never do it, because they know that even if they didn't do it, they will still be occupying a CFO position, they will still be in an internal audit function, they will still be head of supply chain. So it's a roller coaster of many years of neglect of these controls that is now starting to translate into these big numbers.
And
not
why?
That they were small before.
Why are they getting away with it? I mean, is this because we're not having prosecutions, or because provincial and government leadership is just not implementing any consequence management at all?
Well, it starts with the institution itself. I suspect if you think about an institution that's responsible for delivering houses, and it gets given a budget to build 200 houses, and that budget was considered to be enough to build 200 houses, and then they account only for 100, but there's no change from the money that they were given, and then there's also no consequence for having 100 instead of 200. That is what is at the heart of it. It's a culture where the leadership of an institution entrusted with these responsibilities does not take the necessary steps. Even before we get to prosecution, we start at the institutional level, where those that are charged with this responsibility ask the difficult questions before we get to court. But they start asking the difficult questions in the institution, and they start taking steps in accordance with the laws that empower them to fix that situation. That is what is at the heart of it. If you don't do it that way, we are going to end up spending endless months in court trying to prove documents when in fact you could have prevented it at the level of the institution directly. It's a culture issue, it's a leadership issue, it's a reflection of how people take seriously some of those prescripts that are there in law.
Okay, so you have at least some enhanced powers now. For the first time, you can report on what's called material irregularities. So that's things like theft, like fraud. I can't believe you couldn't tell us before what was going on. But tell us what you found and what you're reporting on now in terms of those material irregularities.
Well, what has happened in terms of the Public Audit Act amendment is a development from what we had in the Public Audit Act. Remember, when these laws were brought about in the early 90s, they were all based on the principle that people will gear up and mobilize themselves towards doing the accountability and transparency required in the Constitution. So it was not necessary to have such stringent regulations to the point where someone must pay out of their pocket, which is what these new amendments have come up with. So you kind of based on the fact that we hope that everyone here will do the right thing. But over the years, it was evident that not everybody has bought into that discipline, hence the introduction of these new amendments in the Public Audit Act. It was also based on looking and reflecting over the last 20 years to say what has actually happened since all of these reports were issued. And the key diagnosis was that when people get audited and they know that they are only going to be exposed to a shouting match after the audit outcomes are released, and there's nothing that's going to make it more painful for them, they can as well get away with it, because next year, if they are gone, the next lot coming will do exactly the same. So what this new Public Audit Act says now in terms of the new provisions is that as an accounting officer, you're not really going to get away with it for too long. Because in the year that you are being audited, you are going to be given certain specific recommendations to reverse any financial loss that has been incurred. And if you ignore it, it's going to become a binding remedial action. And if you ignore that binding remedial action that has been communicated to you, you're then going to have to pay a portion of whatever has been lost by the fiscus. Now that is trying to do something that was not necessary, and it was made necessary because of the history of disregard for all of these laws that are there to try and protect the public purse. So one can almost say that it's a natural development of people who get away because there's lots of impunity.
Yeah. So there's a nice example here, overpricing, inflated prices. We know that's been happening, and you have named and shamed the Passenger Rail Agency, or PRASA. So is this the old problem of PRASA basically ordering the wrong trains? And then what is your remedial action, if anything, there?
Well, you can look at that in isolation from other activities that are taking place around PRASA investigations that were either done by the public protector or those that were done through the board of PRASA yesteryears. All we did this time around when we applied these new regulations, we actually reconfirmed the accuracy of the conclusions that were reached in previous investigations. So there's nothing extraordinary on our side that needs to be done. It just is a case of we now reconfirm with substantive audit evidence that whatever conclusions were reached on those locomotives are still valid.
Yeah. Is there any chance of getting any money back, though?
Well, remember, the audit office is not an investigator that gets to the depth of what was the intention of the people who put together the contract documents. There are other agencies that are doing that, isn't it? They are busy doing that work now as we speak. We read about it all the time. So I am not in a position as an audit office to give assurance that it will be recovered. There are other agencies that have got the line of sight into prospects for recovery.
Okay, are you able to give us other examples of the flagrant abuse of taxpayers' money, things that you've found that you are now able to highlight that you weren't able to before?
Well, I'll give you an example. There's an entity, for example, that received a prepayment in one of the provinces where they were required to train young people coming out of a high school environment and give them driving lessons. Now, this third-party entity got the contract and requested a prepayment, was given the prepayment by the department on the understanding and faith that they will do the delivery of this particular program as awarded to them. So they went off with the prepayment and did other things with the money other than to pay those different service providers who trained the young people. To us, that is a direct consequence of not having strong controls in the institution to prevent the abuse by external third parties, because they also abuse the system. It's not only the people internally, it's also the third-party service providers who claim that they've got everything required to deliver on programs, but what they do once they get given payments before they deliver, they walk away with the money. Now, what you are saying in this report is that if you are going to adopt a posture that is going to wait for that loss to materialize, you must know that you are in for more costs, because you're going to have to get forensic auditors, you're going to need to get lawyers, you're going to have to get into all sorts of debates about the validity of the findings, as opposed to if you put in place preventative controls in the environment to discourage the extent of those prepayments when you do not trust the capacity of those service providers, then you've got less of a battle to fight because the money has not necessarily changed hands in a significant way. Those are the simple disciplines that we're talking about. Now, when you do an audit, you do not know at that point whether the person making the payment has got an inherent benefit out of that payment to the third party, because some people have got relationships in business which may not be disclosed to the entities where they work. So you've got a variety of these things that can lend themselves to abuse of public funds if the preventative controls that are supposed to be insisted upon are not in place. That is the area we are navigating as an audit office, not to try and position ourselves as prosecutors or any such disciplines. Those disciplines are there for a different purpose to achieve, but ours is to shine the light, if you like, into the accounting records and put a spotlight in the areas that are generally vulnerable to financial abuse.
All right, so you stop the problem before it starts.
We do that. Sorry?
Okay. Auditor General, can I stop you there because we're running out of time? Can I ask you very quickly then about two provinces, because we haven't got into the provinces. The Western Cape doing well again. What can other provinces learn from them? And why are you concerned about Gauteng?
Well, firstly, the Western Cape, if you go back, right back to 2009, and you track the audit outcomes of the Western Cape province for all these years, you'll discover that once the leadership took decisions to introduce a mechanism to control and to manage and to prevent some of these abuses, you started seeing a change even among the accounting officers and senior management in those departments. It was that discipline. It was enforced. It was carried out as if everything depended on it. That's the kind of culture that we experienced as those transactions were coming through those departments. And it's not by fluke that it ended up at the level where it is. Over the years, it has always been growing at that level. But if you look at Gauteng has always had unqualified audits. Unfortunately, this year, because of lapses in some controls, especially in supply chain, two major departments in that province have slipped back, not only to a qualification. We've never had disclaimers there, but now we do have two disclaimers in Gauteng. And it's a lapse of those basic disciplines and control. And once those controls lapse, then you must know that many people will find loopholes and opportunities to make away, and you'll discover it after a number of months after the payments have been made. So that is the crux of the matter when it comes to Gauteng.
All right, so hopefully that discipline comes back. I wish we could chat further. Thank you very much for that overview. That was the Auditor General, Kimi Makwetu, live with us in our studio in Cape Town.